Some shows get solved. The mystery runs for a season or two, the clues pile up, the finale arrives, the answer gets delivered, and the audience moves on. That's how it's supposed to work. The mystery is the engine. The solution is the destination. You get there, you get out, you find something else to think about. The Simpsons has been on television since December 17th, 1989. 36 years, 788 episodes. And in all that time, across every season and every story and every writer's room that has cycled through that production, the show has been generating mysteries at a pace that no finale has ever come close to resolving. Not because the writers are careless, not because the show forgot what it planned, but because some questions, once asked inside a universe that has been running for 36 years, become part of the furniture, part of the air, part of the specific atmosphere that makes Springfield feel like the place you know better than most of the actual places you have lived. The mysteries in this video have been haunting fans for years, some of them for decades. Some of them since the very first seasons when the show was still figuring out what it was and planted seeds it never came back to water. Some of them were answered officially, answered on screen or in DVD commentaries, and the answers only made the questions worse. Deeper. More unsettling than they were before the official version arrived. Because here's the thing about Springfield that separates it from every other fictional universe that has ever asked its audience to pay attention. Springfield doesn't just generate mysteries, as it generates mysteries that the show itself cannot fully contain. Mysteries that spill out past the episode boundaries and the season arcs and the official explanations into the space where 36 years of canon sit in tension with each other, contradicting and corroborating and creating patterns the writers may not have intended, but that exist in the record regardless. Once you start pulling at the threads of this show, once you start looking at the exposed wiring behind 36 years of jokes and callbacks and continuity errors, you don't find lazy writing. You find things the show put there and walked away from. You find questions it raised and refused to answer. You find doors it opened and never went through, and the darkness in those doorways is sometimes more interesting than anything the show actually chose to say. Think about what it means to have been watching the same show for 36 years. For most of the people watching this right now, The Simpsons has been present for the majority of their lives. It was there before they were old enough to understand it. It was there when they were old enough. It was there through every phase of their life, and it is there right now, tonight, in whatever room they are sitting in. That kind of familiarity does something specific. It creates the illusion of complete knowledge. The sense that a thing you have known for so long must be fully understood, fully mapped. Springfield is not fully mapped. That is the specific premise of everything we are about to do. The show has been on for 36 years, and there are still things in it that don't add up. Questions it raised and didn't answer. Story threads. It started and then left, running somewhere in the background of the episodes that came after, unresolved and unacknowledged, and sitting in the permanent record of a show that has produced more permanent record than any other scripted television program in history. 788 episodes, 36 seasons, and the mysteries are still there, still open, still generating the specific quality of discomfort that comes from a question you know exists but cannot answer. The itch at the back of the mind that fires up every time you rewatch an old episode and notice something you didn't notice the last time. Something the show placed deliberately and then declined to explain. We are going to work through those mysteries tonight, one at a time, in the slow, patient, thorough way they deserve. But we are not going to rush past the things that are complicated because they are complicated. We are going to sit with them, turn them over, look at them from the angles the show didn't offer you. Some of what we find will be unsettling. Some of it will be sad in the specific way that familiar things become sad when you look at them too directly. Some of it will change how you watch the show the next time you watch it, which is the specific promise this kind of examination makes and which I believe this one keeps. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let the lights come down if you want them down. Let Springfield come to you in the dark and the quiet, and let us see what it has been hiding all this time. Because it has been hiding things. The evidence is in the 36 years of episodes sitting in the record, waiting to be read correctly. Let's read them. Let's start. Mystery 1. The skeletons in the basement of the nuclear plant. Start here because this is the mystery that the show drops most casually, that sits most quietly in the background of everything else. And that becomes more disturbing the longer you think about it without the show's comedic framing protecting you from what it actually implies. In a very early episode, during a tour or inspection of the Springfield nuclear power plant, the camera briefly reveals skeletons in the basement. Human skeletons. Not animal remains, not industrial waste improperly disposed of, not some kind of storage error or comedic background gag that happens to resemble bones. Human skeletal remains inside the basement of an operational nuclear power facility. The show reveals this and moves on. There is no investigation, there is no follow-up. Chief Wiggum does not appear. Nobody files a report. The skeletons are present in one scene, acknowledged by no one in the episode's narrative, and then they are never mentioned again. Not in that episode. Not in any subsequent episode. Not in any official DVD commentary or interview or writer's room account that has ever become public. The skeletons are shown to the audience and then released into the void of Springfield's collective amnesia, where they join everything else this town has agreed not to examine too closely. But you saw them. And once you've seen human remains in the basement of a building that employs several of the characters you spend Sunday nights with, the question doesn't go away just because the show stopped asking it. Who were they? The practical explanations start reasonably enough. The Springfield nuclear plant has been operating since before the show began. Its history, sketched across dozens of episodes in contradictory pieces, suggests it has been running for decades under the ownership of Charles Montgomery Burns, a man who has displayed, consistently and with remarkable transparency, a complete indifference to the safety and survival of the people who work for him. The plant has 342 documented safety violations. It has cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum. It has radioactive waste being disposed of in local waterways and on children's playgrounds. It has luminous rats. It has a safety inspector, Homer Simpson, whose IQ has been stated at 55, and who once attempted to increase the size of a donut by throwing it into the reactor core. Given all of this, it is not difficult to construct a scenario in which people died inside that facility, under circumstances Burns would have strong reasons to conceal. Industrial accidents happen. They happen more frequently in facilities with 342 safety violations than in facilities where someone actually cares about the workers. And Burns's relationship with his workforce has been established across the show's entire run as one of comprehensive indifference. He genuinely cannot reliably remember Homer's name, and Homer has worked for him his entire adult life, so people died. That part is almost certainly the explanation the show gestures toward without saying. The violations and the negligence and the decades of unchecked operation created conditions in which deaths occurred. And those deaths were not reported and not investigated because Burns has sufficient influence over Springfield's institutional infrastructure to ensure that certain things stay unexamined. That's the reasonable reading. That's the reading that keeps the mystery within the borders of Springfield's established dark comedy. But the mystery doesn't stay there if you keep pulling. Because the show has also established, in various episodes, that Burns is not simply negligent. Burns is strategic. Much Burns understands the value of the things he conceals and makes deliberate choices about what to hide and how. He has maintained financial and political control over Springfield for the entirety of the show's run, not through luck or inattention, but through active, sustained management of information and relationships. He funded local politicians. He controls the power supply. He has personal physicians whose silence is presumably compensated. He has Smithers whose loyalty and organizational competence have kept Burns's operation running across circumstances that would have exposed a less carefully managed enterprise decades ago. A man with that level of institutional control does not accidentally leave skeletons in the basement, or rather, he doesn't leave them there accidentally and without awareness that they are there. If those remains are in that basement, Burns knows they are in that basement. He has known for as long as they have been there. The question the show never asks is what put them there and what keeps them there instead of somewhere less visible. And the darker version of that question is this. How many people in Springfield know that Burns is the kind of man who has human remains in the basement of his facility and have made the specific, active decision to continue working for him anyway? How many of them need the job badly enough? How many of them are sufficiently dependent on the economic structure that Burns controls that the knowledge of those bones becomes simply another thing that gets added to the list of things Springfield has agreed not to discuss? Homer knows the violations. A Homer has been present for at least some of the near disasters the plant generates on a regular basis. Homer lives in a house whose electricity comes from that plant, whose water has been downstream of its runoff, whose children were born and raised in the specific radius of contamination that the show has documented in episode after episode. And Homer goes back every day. That's not laziness. That's not stupidity, or not only stupidity. That's what it looks like when the economic dependency is total. When the alternative to working for the man with the skeletons in his basement is not working at all. When the town runs on the plant, and the plant runs on Burns, and Burns runs on the labor of people who have nowhere else to go and know it. The skeletons in the basement, my basement, are not a background joke. And they are the show's most compressed articulation of everything it has been saying about Burns and Springfield, and the specific quality of desperation that keeps people in arrangements they know are wrong. It just said it with bones and then kept moving. The show never came back to explain who those people were. It never will, but they were someone. They had names, they had families, presumably in Springfield. Presumably people who were told something other than the truth about what happened to them. And the remains are still there, in the basement, under the cracked cooling towers, behind the chewing gum, every time Homer clocks in for another shift. CT a break. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me what time it is, where you are, and what country you're watching from. This is one of the things I genuinely love about this channel. People falling asleep to Springfield from completely different corners of the planet, completely different hours, completely different kinds of dark. I want to know where you are tonight. And if you're new here, subscribe. This is what we do here. We go slow, we go deep, and we stay in Springfield until we figure out what Springfield is actually saying. There's a lot more to get through. Let's keep going. Mystery. 2. Where exactly is Springfield, and why does the show keep lying about it? This is the mystery that the show's own creator tried to solve, and then immediately unsolved. And the unsettling part is that his decision to take back the answer might have been the most honest thing he ever said about the show. Springfield is the most famous fictional American town in the history of television. More people can identify Springfield than can name the capital of 20 actual American states. I.e., it has a nuclear power plant and a tire fire and a gorge and a monorail and a harbor, and a downtown and an elementary school and a prison and a lemon tree and a butte, and an entire ecosystem of local landmarks that viewers have been navigating for 36 years with the specific proprietary familiarity you develop for places you've known your whole life. Nobody knows where it is. Not approximately. Not in a way that you could narrow down to a region. Springfield has been placed across the show's run in geographic contexts that are mutually exclusive. It borders Ohio in one episode. It borders Nevada in another. It is adjacent to Kentucky and also adjacent to Maine and also adjacent to somewhere that appears to be on the Canadian border and also somewhere that appears to be near Mexico. The state abbreviation has appeared on screen, and it is NT. There is no American state with the abbreviation NT. The landscape contains mountains, it contains coastline, it contains desert, it contains farmland, it contains forests. These geographic features do not coexist within a reasonable driving radius in any actual American location. Springfield has the climate diversity of a continent compressed into the geography of a mid-sized town. In a single season, it can experience blizzards, tropical heat, earthquakes, tornadoes, and the kind of mild, pleasant weather that seems inconsistent with any of the previous 3. The show has been doing this deliberately and consistently for its entire run. Every time a fan community or a journalist or a particularly determined investigator has assembled enough clues to triangulate Springfield's location, with what feels like confidence, the next episode has placed a geographic detail that makes the conclusion impossible. It's not random. The contradictions are too consistent to be random. The show actively generates new reasons why Springfield can't be where you just decided it was. And it has been doing this since the early seasons when the geographic contradictions first became noticeable enough that fans started paying attention to them. In 2012, Matt Groening told Smithsonian Magazine that Springfield was based on Springfield, Oregon. He grew up near it. He chose the name because it appeared on a television show he watched as a child. And because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, and because the ambiguity of a name shared by dozens of states felt right for a show that was trying to be everywhere at once. For about 48 hours, the mystery was solved. Then the show kept contradicting the Oregon answer in subsequent episodes. New geographic details appeared that didn't fit the Pacific Northwest. New state boundary references materialized that pointed elsewhere. The writers didn't honor Groening's confession. The show kept being impossible to locate. And the more interesting question isn't where Springfield actually is. The more interesting question is why the show has spent 36 years making it impossible to find out. The surface answer is intentional design. The show is supposed to be universal. Now, it's supposed to be every American town, everywhere and nowhere, familiar to viewers regardless of where they grew up, because it incorporates every American geography rather than committing to one. Springfield's impossible landscape means that wherever you are, some part of Springfield looks like somewhere you've been. The mountains might be yours. The coast might be yours. The flat Midwestern plains might be yours. Springfield is built to feel like home to everyone, which means it can't have a specific home of its own. That's the intentional design answer. It's probably true. It's also probably not the whole story. Because there is a darker reading of Springfield's geographic elusiveness, one that connects to everything else the show has established about the way this town operates. You cannot regulate a town you cannot locate. Yet you cannot enforce federal environmental standards on a nuclear facility if you cannot definitively establish which state's regulatory framework applies to it. You cannot bring federal charges related to contamination of local waterways if the jurisdiction shifts every time an attorney tries to file the paperwork. Springfield's geographic impossibility is, in practice, a legal shield. The plant operates in a regulatory vacuum because the regulatory vacuum is built into the town's physical reality. Every state agency that might be responsible for oversight has a plausible reason to defer to another state's authority. Every federal investigation that might examine the 342 violations runs into the jurisdictional ambiguity and slows down. The cracked cooling towers, the luminous rats, the radioactive waste in the playground, all of it exists in a space where accountability is structurally prevented not by bribery or political influence alone, but by the fundamental geographic instability of the location itself. Burns doesn't need to bribe every regulator in every state. He just needs Springfield to keep being impossible to put on a map. And Springfield, for reasons the show never explains, has been cooperative with that requirement for 36 years. The fan theories about this are extensive. Some argue that Springfield's geographic instability is connected to the radiation, that the contamination doesn't just affect biology, but warps the physical space around the town, compressing geographies that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. Now, it sounds like science fiction, until you remember that this is a town where people have 4 fingers and 3-eyed fish and a man who has been alive for over a century through weekly radiation treatments. The rules in Springfield are different. They have always been different. And the geography is just one more expression of how different the rules are. There is also the coma theory reading of the geography, which fits with unsettling precision. If Springfield is the dream of an unconscious man, then its geographic impossibility is not a satirical device or a legal shield. It's the natural output of a brain assembling a location from fragments. Homer's brain does not have a precise topographic map of America. It has impressions. Mountains from a vacation, ocean from something he saw on television, desert from a movie, farmland from driving through the Midwest with his family. The dreaming brain assembles these pieces without concern for geographic logic because dreams don't operate on geographic logic. They operate on emotional logic. And emotionally, Springfield is the place where Homer's family is. The specific details of what surrounds that fact are assembled from whatever the dreaming mind has available. Under the coma theory, Springfield's geography being impossible is not a flaw in the dream's construction. It's honest. It's what a location looks like when it's built from feeling rather than fact. But even setting aside the coma reading, even staying within the show's waking world logic, The geographic possibility has accumulated across 36 years into something that feels less like a production quirk and more like a feature. Although the show has been too consistent in its inconsistency for it to be accidental, new episodes keep generating new contradictions. New geographic details keep appearing that close off the possibilities that fans thought they had identified. The show actively maintains Springfield's unlocatability, and the maintenance requires effort, which means the unlocatability is desired. Springfield doesn't have a location. It has a function. The function it serves, for the show, is universality. For Burns, it's impunity. For the audience, it's familiarity without specificity. The feeling of a place you know, without the constraints of an actual place you could visit and examine. You can't visit Springfield. You can't drive to it, yeah. You can't point to it on a map. But if you close your eyes and let the theme song play in your head, you can feel exactly where it is. That's the only location Springfield has ever had. And it has been more than enough. Mystery. 3. What actually happened between Homer and Mindy? This is a mystery that operates at a smaller scale than most of the others in this video, but it sits in the show's record with a specificity that makes it impossible to dismiss. And the question it raises about who Homer Simpson actually is underneath the comedy is one the show answered and then pretended it hadn't. The episode is Colonel Homer, Season 3, a different one. The one we're examining is Colonel Homer, but the relevant episode is actually The Last Temptation of Homer from Season 5. Where Homer meets Mindy Simmons, a new employee at the power plant who is, by every measure the show applies, Homer's perfect match. She likes donuts, she watches football. She has the same appetites, the same instincts, the same comfort-seeking, pleasure-oriented approach to daily life. She is the female version of Homer Simpson, and the episode builds with genuine discomfort toward the question of whether Homer will remain faithful to Marge. The show answers the question with a vision sequence and a hotel room and a fortune cookie and the implication that Homer chose correctly. The episode ends with Homer and Marge together. The reset button fires. Mindy disappears from the show entirely. She is never seen or mentioned again. But the episode doesn't quite answer the question it asks. It shows you Homer in the hotel room. And it shows you the fortune cookie reading, "You will find happiness with a new love." It cuts away at the critical moment and lets the viewer fill in what happened with whatever version of Homer's character they believe in. The show did this deliberately. The writers have acknowledged in various interviews and commentaries that the episode was constructed to be ambiguous, to leave the hotel room scene open-ended enough that you couldn't be entirely certain what happened. It's a technical achievement, a piece of writing that allows two different audiences to watch the same scene and come away with two different conclusions. But the ambiguity creates a mystery that the show never resolved. Not because the writers couldn't resolve it, but because resolving it would require committing to a version of Homer's character that the show wasn't willing to live with permanently. If Homer was faithful, then the episode is a story about temptation survived, about a man who chose his family when the choice was hardest, about the love between Homer and Marge being strong enough to hold under genuine pressure. That's the version most viewers prefer. It's the version the show seems to prefer, given that it reset to normal by the next episode. If Homer wasn't faithful, then something much more complicated is sitting underneath 36 years of the show's central relationship. Then the marriage between Homer and Marge contains a secret that Marge doesn't know about. And every subsequent episode where the show asks you to root for their love is built on a foundation that, at some point in Season 5, cracked without ever being acknowledged. The show produced the ambiguity and then walked away from it. It never came back. Mindy never reappeared to provide context. Homer never had a moment of explicit reckoning. The marriage proceeded as if the hotel room had never happened, which is either a testament to Homer's faithfulness or evidence of the show's most significant buried secret. The fans who believe he was faithful point to the fortune cookie. The fortune said new love would bring happiness. Homer and Marge renewed their connection at the end of the episode. The new love was Marge, rediscovered. That's the optimistic reading. It's clean. It lets the marriage be what the show has always said it is. The fans who aren't sure point to the cutting away, to the deliberate ambiguity, and to the fact that a show as carefully constructed as The Simpsons, at its peak, doesn't accidentally create a scene that allows two incompatible conclusions. To the fact that the writer specifically designed the moment to be unresolvable. And to one more thing, to the fact that in a later episode, in a throwaway moment that the show did not dwell on, Homer refers to Mindy in a way that implies continued contact. Not explicitly, not in a way the show invites you to examine too closely, but it's there, in the record. A single line that suggests the story didn't end where the episode ended. The show never confirmed what happened in that hotel room. It never will. The ambiguity is the point. But the question it leaves behind. So the question of who Homer Simpson actually is when the stakes are real and the consequences are immediate and nobody is watching, that question has been sitting in the subtext of every episode about the Homer and Marge relationship ever since. The show gave you the marriage and gave you the love and gave you the sweetness. And then it put a hotel room scene in season 5 that it deliberately refused to resolve, and it moved on, and it hoped you would too. Most viewers did. But some of them have been sitting with that hotel room for 20 years. And here is why it matters beyond the individual episode. Because the hotel room is not just a mystery about what Homer did or didn't do on one night in season 5. It is a mystery about what the show is willing to say about the nature of Homer and Marge's love. And if the show had committed to a resolution, either direction, it would have said something definitive. The faithful version says the love is sufficient to withstand the most acute kind of temptation. That Homer, given the opportunity and the plausible deniability, chose Marge. Not because he had to, because he wanted to, because whatever complicated, imperfect, periodically destructive thing their marriage is, it is also the thing he actually wants. That's a statement about the marriage and about Homer that carries real weight. The unfaithful version says something harder and more honest about the show's understanding of Homer as a character. That the man who cannot reliably remember his anniversary or stay awake at his daughter's recital, or manage the basics of daily spousal consideration would also, when removed from the social accountability structures that normally contain him, make the choice that served his immediate wants. That's not a condemnation, it's a portrait. A portrait the show would have had to live with. The ambiguous version says the show isn't willing to commit to either portrait. It says the writers wanted the tension of the question without the cost of the answer. And that choice, while technically elegant, created the mystery that has been sitting in the marriage's subtext ever since. Because the uncertainty doesn't disappear just because the show declined to resolve it. It migrates. It attaches itself to every subsequent scene where Homer and Marge are tender with each other, every episode where the marriage is the thing that survives, every moment where the love is supposed to feel uncomplicated and earned. And the uncertainty makes those moments slightly different than they would be if the hotel room had been resolved. Not ruined, slightly different. The way that knowledge you can't verify always makes the thing. It touches slightly different from what it would be without the knowledge. The show created that uncertainty deliberately. It lives in the show's permanent record. And some part of every viewer who knows about the hotel room carries it forward into every episode that followed. That's the specific weight of an unresolved mystery in a show you have been watching for 36 years. It doesn't go away. It becomes part of the atmosphere. The hotel room is part of Springfield's atmosphere now. It has been since 1994. That mystery 4. The real reason Troy McClure disappeared of my... Troy McClure was one of the most beloved recurring characters in the show's golden age. A washed-up film and television actor reduced to hosting industrial videos and public service announcements and infomercials, always introducing himself with the same construction. You may remember me from such films as, and then 2 increasingly absurd credits. He was voiced by Phil Hartman with a specific quality of oblivious self-regard that made him simultaneously pathetic and magnetic, a character you couldn't look away from even as you were laughing at him. And then he was gone. Phil Hartman was murdered in May 1998 by his wife, Bryn Hartman, who then took her own life. The tragedy was immediate and complete, and the show's response was equally immediate. Al Jean and Mike Rice and the writers who were running the show at the time made the decision that Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, the other major recurring character Hartman voiced, would be retired. Not recast, not handed to another actor, not folded into the show's mythology with an on-screen explanation. Retired, removed. The characters would simply no longer appear, and the audience was left to understand why without being told directly. That decision was the right one. There is no serious argument that it was wrong. Recasting Phil Hartman's characters would have been a different kind of wrong, an attempt to replace something irreplaceable that would have only drawn attention to the loss rather than honoring it. But the retirement created a mystery that the show's logic generates automatically. What happened to Troy McClure? What happened to Lionel Hutz? Within the world of Springfield, these are people who existed and then stopped existing without explanation. Characters who had ongoing presences in the town's life, who appeared in multiple seasons, who had relationships with other recurring characters, who were woven into the fabric of Springfield's social and professional ecosystem. They didn't die on screen. They didn't move away. They simply ceased to appear. Springfield doesn't usually let that happen without filling the space. The show has a habit of explaining absences, out of providing reasons for why characters who used to appear no longer do, of maintaining a surface-level continuity that lets the world feel coherent. But for Troy and Lionel, no explanation was ever offered. The show respected the reason for their absence too much to fabricate a fictional explanation for it, which means that within the logic of Springfield, there is a question sitting unresolved. Where did these people go? Troy McClure had a career, however diminished. He had an apartment in Springfield. He had a presence in the community. Lionel Hutz had a law practice, however catastrophically incompetent. He had clients. He had a physical location, an office that the show had depicted. The characters' disappearances are the show's clearest intersection between its fictional world and the real tragedy that produced them. Troy and Lionel exist in a weird liminal space in the show's canon. They're there in the early episodes. They're not there in the later ones. And the reason is not something the show can address within its own fiction, because the reason is real. It belongs to the actual world, not to Springfield. Fans have proposed various in-universe explanations. Troy finally got the film role that relaunched his career and moved to Hollywood. Lionel Hutz was disbarred for the last time and relocated to another state. The explanations are gentle and kind, and they honor the characters without addressing what actually happened. But the real mystery isn't in-universe. The real mystery is about what it means for a fictional world to carry the weight of a real loss. Springfield is not real. Troy McClure is not real. Phil Hartman was real, and his absence is real. And the space he left in the show is a kind of monument to that reality. A negative space where a voice used to be. The show handled it with more grace than most situations like this allow for. But grace doesn't resolve the mystery. It only makes the space where the characters used to be feel more deliberate, more considered, more specifically shaped by something the show can never say out loud. Troy McClure is somewhere in Springfield right now. In the 36-year-old version of the town that exists in the show's permanent record, he's still there, introducing himself with those two absurd credits, waiting for a role that will never quite arrive. The show just stopped showing him to us, and the reason for that is the saddest unsolved mystery the show contains. Mystery 5. The truth about Homer's IQ and what it means for everything he's ever done. The show has stated Homer Simpson's IQ as 55. This number comes from an episode where Homer is tested, receives his result, and the number is presented to the audience as a factual piece of information about the character's cognitive capacity. An IQ of 55, in clinical terms, falls in the range of moderate intellectual disability. It is a number that, if accurate, would make the basic demands of Homer's daily life, his childhood, his marriage, his navigation of social situations, his ability to drive a car and manage money and make decisions with consequences, significantly more difficult than the show has generally depicted. The show presents Homer's limited intelligence as comedy, as the engine of most of its plots. Homer does stupid things because Homer is not smart, and the stupidity is funny, and 36 years of audiences have laughed at it and loved it and returned for more of it every Sunday night. That's the surface of the mystery. The mystery underneath it is the crayon. In season 12, Homer undergoes a procedure to remove a crayon that has been lodged in his brain since childhood. The crayon, the show reveals, has been physically impeding Homer's cognitive function for the majority of his life. It has been pressing against a specific region of his brain in a way that reduces his intelligence significantly below its natural baseline. Without the crayon, Homer is not IQ 55. But without the crayon, Homer tests at genius level. He becomes articulate, analytical, capable of complex reasoning, able to understand and engage with the world at a level that his crayon-impeded version has never been able to reach. The episode is funny and sad in equal measure, which is the show at its best. Homer at genius level is miserable. He can see Springfield clearly. He can see his job for what it is. He can see the gap between the life he has and the life his intelligence would allow him to build if the intelligence had always been available to him. The clarity is unbearable. So he has the crayon put back in. He chooses to be less intelligent because being more intelligent in Springfield is too painful to sustain. That's the story the episode tells. It's a beautiful and devastating story, and it stands on its own. But it generates a mystery the show never followed all the way down. How did a crayon get lodged in Homer's brain in the first place? The show provides a flashback that answers this question with comedy, showing young Homer shoving a crayon up his nose, and it's played for laughs, and the laugh track fires, and the episode moves past it. But if you don't move past it, if you sit with the image of a young Homer Simpson with a crayon in his brain and ask the question the show explicitly doesn't want you to ask, the answer is unsettling in a way that connects to everything else the show has established about Springfield. Homer was a child in Springfield. He grew up in a household that the show has documented in various flashback episodes as chaotic and emotionally neglectful in the specific ways that Abe Simpson's parenting style produced. He grew up in a town contaminated by the nuclear plant. He grew up in an environment that the radiation theory suggests has been systematically degrading the cognitive function of its residents for decades. And he had a foreign object in his brain that went undetected by every medical professional who examined him from childhood through adulthood until he voluntarily had it removed as a middle-aged man. That last part is the part that doesn't make sense under the charitable reading. In the course of a normal life, Homer would have had medical examinations. He would have had school physicals. He would have had some level of routine medical contact that should, at some point, have detected a crayon embedded in his brain tissue. The fact that it wasn't detected for decades is not a comedy beat once you look at it directly. It's a failure of the medical infrastructure of Springfield so complete and so sustained that it requires an explanation. The explanation the show never offers, but that the evidence supports, is this. The medical infrastructure of Springfield, like every other institution in Springfield, is compromised. Not necessarily by direct corruption, not necessarily by Burns writing checks to every doctor in town, but by the broader atmosphere of managed ignorance that keeps Springfield's population from examining too closely the things that would require someone to do something about them. Doctors in Springfield, in this reading, have developed the same practiced incuriosity that everyone else in town has developed. They find what they're looking for. They don't find what they're not. And nobody in Springfield's medical establishment was looking for what the plant had done to its residents. Because looking would lead to questions, and questions would lead to answers, and answers would lead to Burns. The crayon in Homer's brain is a metaphor the show uses to talk about something it can't say directly. Something is wrong with the brains of Springfield's residents, something that keeps them manageable. Something that keeps them from connecting the dots between the cracked cooling towers and the luminous rats and the four-fingered children and the three-eyed fish. Homer had it literally and visibly. The others have it in ways the show depicts through behavior rather than radiology. He chose to put it back. He had the choice. Most of the other residents of Springfield never had the crayon removed in the first place. They've been living with whatever the equivalent is for their entire lives without ever knowing it was there. Now extend this. Think about what a genius-level Homer would have done with his specific situation. He works at a nuclear facility. He has intimate daily access to the violations and the negligence and the evidence of what the plant is doing to the town around it. A Homer with the cognitive capacity to understand and connect that evidence would not be a man who falls asleep at his workstation. That he would not be a man who fails to notice the luminous rats or the cracked cooling towers or the three-eyed fish in the river behind the facility. He would be the most dangerous person in Springfield. He would be the one person in position to document the violations, understand their implications, and take that documentation somewhere it could produce consequences. A genius Homer with access to what Homer has access to would be Burns's single greatest vulnerability. And the crayon prevents that. Whether it was placed there intentionally or got there by accident and stayed there by institutional incompetence, the effect is the same. Homer's intelligence is suppressed to the level where he cannot be dangerous, where the evidence he encounters every day at the plant cannot be processed into a threat. Thus, the episode where the crown is removed shows you what Homer becomes with access to his full intelligence. He writes a report on the plant's safety violations, he publishes it, he sends it to the appropriate authorities. He does, in a single moment of clarity, exactly what should have been done for the entire duration of his employment. And then it all falls apart. Because Springfield won't act on it. Because the town's infrastructure can absorb the information without producing the response the information demands. And because being the person who sees clearly in Springfield, as Lisa has discovered across 36 seasons, is the loneliest and most exhausting way to exist there. So he puts the crayon back. He chooses the fog. And the show treats this as a character decision and a choice Homer made about the kind of life he wanted to live. And it is that. It's also an indictment of a system so thorough in its management of the people inside it that the most rational response to gaining access to your full intelligence is to give it up again. The show told you all of this in a season 12 episode. It then put the crayon back in and treated it as a resolved story. The question of what it means for everything Homer has ever done, every job he's ever performed, every decision he's ever made, every disaster he's been responsible for, is one the show raised and then declined to answer. Because the answer to that question is not a comedy episode. It's an indictment of a system that needed Homer exactly as damaged as he was, and kept him that way for 36 years. But Mystery 6. What is the real history of the Burns family, and how long have they owned Springfield? Charles Montgomery Burns is, by any estimate the show provides, over 100 years old. Some episodes suggest he may be significantly older than that. He has personal memories of events from the early 20th century that he describes as first-hand experiences. He attended Yale. He served in some capacity during World War II, a service record the show depicts as morally complicated at best and actively villainous at worst. He has described the Gilded Age not as historical period, but as personal context. He has referenced Howard Hughes not as a historical figure, but as someone he knew. The show uses Burns's extreme age as a source of comedy. His frailty, his disconnection from contemporary culture, his use of archaic language and references that land with no one under 60, all of this is played for laughs. It's funny that Burns is so old. It's funny that his frame of reference is so distant from the present moment. But the mystery underneath the comedy is one the show gestures toward repeatedly without ever fully examining. Burns has been here for a very long time, and the Burns family has been here even longer. And the extent of what they own and control and have shaped in Springfield across that time is never fully mapped. What we know is assembled from scattered episodes and flashbacks and throwaway lines that accumulated over 36 seasons without ever being assembled into a coherent account. Now, the Burns family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The current Burns inherited a fortune that was already ancient when he took control of it. The family has had continuous economic presence in the American landscape for long enough that their institutional reach has become indistinguishable from the landscape itself. In Springfield specifically, Burns's ownership extends beyond the power plant. The plant is the obvious and documented center of his local empire. But across various episodes, the show establishes that Burns's financial tentacles reach into the town's political structure, its media, its real estate, its banking. He has owned the water supply, he has controlled the local newspaper. Yet he has bought elections and intimidated politicians and created the specific civic conditions under which a town learns not to ask too many questions about the person who keeps the lights on. The mystery is how long this has been going on, not in the sense of counting years from a specific founding date, in the sense of trying to understand what Springfield looked like before Burns. Whether Springfield ever existed, in any meaningful sense, as a community independent of Burns's influence. Whether the town was built around the plant and the plant was built around Burns and Burns was built around a family ambition that predates anything the show has bothered to document. The Simpsons movie establishes that Springfield's contamination is severe enough to require physical containment by the federal government. This isn't a recent development. The contamination the EPA responds to in the movie is the accumulation of decades of plant operation under Burns's ownership. The three-eyed fish appeared in Season 2, which the show placed relatively early in the timeline of the plant's operation. Blinky is not the beginning of the contamination story. Blinky is a visible symptom of a contamination that was already systemic by the time a fisherman pulled him out of the water, which means the damage Burns's operation has done to Springfield began well before the show's timeline starts. It was already in progress. The residents who were born in Springfield and have never left were born into an environment that had already been altered by Burns's operation. The contamination they carry in their bodies is not something that happened to them. It is the baseline condition they were born into. Burns built that baseline. The Burns family, across however many generations of continuous economic control, built the specific conditions that make Springfield what it is. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the cognitive fog that keeps the population from examining its own circumstances too closely. These are not accidents of biology. They are the outcomes of an environment that was designed through negligence and greed across multiple generations of a single family's continuous control to produce exactly these outcomes. The show never maps the full Burns family history, as it never traces the lineage from whatever original accumulation of wealth produced the current Burns back through the decades and centuries to whoever made the first choices that set Springfield on the path it's been on ever since. That history exists somewhere in the background of the show's world. The evidence of it is visible in every yellow face, every four-fingered hand, every luminous animal, every resident who has lived their entire life downstream of decisions made by people whose names they don't know and whose influence they cannot see. The mystery is not just who Burns is as. The mystery is how long the conditions that produced Springfield have been in operation, and whether there was ever a version of this town that existed before those conditions were established. The show suggests there might not have been, that Springfield and Burns's ownership of it might be coextensive, that the town that exists in the show's present has never, within the time frame of human memory in Springfield, existed as anything other than what Burns made it. If that's true, then the question of what Springfield could be without Burns is not a question about the future. It's a question about whether that version of Springfield ever existed in the first place. The show raised that question across 36 years of accumulated evidence. It never answered it. Mystery 7. What happened to the real Seymour Skinner after the train? In Season 9, the episode Principal and the Pauper revealed that the man Springfield had known as Principal Seymour Skinner for the previous 8 seasons was in fact Armin Tamzarian, a former street criminal who had assumed the identity of a real soldier named Seymour Skinner, who was presumed dead after being captured in Vietnam. The real Seymour Skinner returned. He was a decorated veteran. He was the actual owner of the identity that Tamzarian had been living inside for 20 years. He was, by any legal and moral accounting, the aggrieved party in a fraud that had cost him his identity, his relationship with his mother Agnes, and his standing in a community he had never lived in. Springfield's response was to hold a town meeting and vote to keep the lie. As the judge issued a decree making the imposter the legal Skinner and making it illegal to mention the truth. The real Seymour Skinner was tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. The episode ends there. The real Skinner leaves. The show moves on. But where did he go? The question sounds small, but it expands the more you sit with it. The real Seymour Skinner is a Vietnam veteran who survived a prisoner of war camp, returned home, and discovered that his identity had been stolen and his mother had adopted his replacement so completely that she preferred the replacement to him. He was then, in front of an assembled crowd of the town that should have been his, voted out of existence and physically removed from the community on a train. That is an almost incomprehensibly complete experience of rejection. Not the ordinary social rejection of being disliked or excluded. The categorical rejection of being told that your existence, your authentic identity, your documented history as a real person with a real name and a real military record is less valuable to the people around you than the comfort of a fiction they have lived with for 20 years. Springfield essentially decided that it preferred a fraud to the truth. And the real Skinner was put on a train and sent away from the only community he had any connection to, with no money mentioned, no support offered, no acknowledgement that what the town did to him was the most complete institutional betrayal imaginable. He was a veteran. He was owed the identity that had been stolen from him. He got none of it back. He got a train out of town and a judge's decree that he didn't legally exist. Where did he go? The show never says. The character never returns. The question of what happens to a person whose identity has been legally transferred to someone else, who has been expelled from the only place that had any meaning for him, who is a decorated veteran with no documented existence in the eyes of the only community that knew him, is one the show introduced and then abandoned completely. The fan theories are gentle. He started over somewhere. He built a new life. He found people who knew him before Tamzarian, fellow veterans maybe, connections from before Springfield, and he reconstructed something from those pieces. Some fans prefer the version where he became something extraordinary, where the injustice Springfield visited on him became the engine of a remarkable second life. But the show provides no evidence for any of these versions. The real Seymour Skinner walked off screen on a train and never came back, and the specific way the show disposed of him, tied to a car, expelled by decree, legally erased, remains one of the most casually brutal things Springfield has ever done to a person who didn't deserve it. The show treated it as a comedy beat, the town choosing the comfortable lie over the inconvenient truth. The joke about collective denial. The satirical observation about how communities protect their self-image. All of that is present in the episode. But underneath it, on the train heading away from Springfield, is a real person the show created and then disposed of without resolution or acknowledgement of the cost. Think about the specific mechanism of what Springfield did. It was not informal. It was not a community gradually forgetting about an uncomfortable truth, the way Springfield forgets about most uncomfortable truths. It was a formal proceeding, a town meeting, a vote, a judge, a legal decree, a physical removal. Springfield went through the full apparatus of institutional authority to make the real Skinner's erasure official. It used the same mechanisms it would use to legalize a real estate transaction or formalize an adoption. It brought the weight of the legal system to bear on the question of which version of Seymour Skinner was real, and it answered that question with paperwork. The real Skinner didn't lose his identity because people forgot him or stopped caring. He lost it because an institution looked at the evidence, understood the evidence, and chose to make the fiction legally binding. The judge didn't believe Tamzarian was the real Skinner. The judge knew the truth and issued a decree anyway. The town didn't forget what it had just learned. It voted on what to do with the knowledge and decided to legally suppress it. This is the principal and the pauper episode's most disturbing and most under-examined implication. Springfield didn't perform collective amnesia in its usual way, which is passive and automatic and doesn't require anyone to make an explicit choice. It performed collective amnesia deliberately, consciously, through a formal process. It looked at the truth and voted it out of existence. But the real Seymour Skinner is the show's most explicit documentation of what Springfield's relationship with truth actually is. Not a natural forgetting, a chosen one, a preference enacted through institutional authority. The town assembled, deliberated, and decided. And what it decided was that it would rather have the comfortable version of events than the accurate one, and it would rather exile the person whose existence made the comfortable version impossible than live with the accurate one. The real Skinner is out there somewhere. The show just doesn't care where. And that indifference, deployed casually and then covered by the laugh track in the next episode's reset, might be the most Springfield thing the show has ever done. Well, because Springfield always has been more interested in maintaining the story it prefers than in acknowledging the one that actually happened. The real Skinner's train was just the one time it did this visibly, on screen, in front of the audience. Every other time, it happened in the gaps between episodes, where no one was watching. Mystery 8. The night Homer didn't come home, and what Marge knows. This mystery exists in the space between episodes, in the gaps that the show's episodic structure creates and then fills with silence. Now, it's built not from a single dramatic revelation, but from the accumulation of a specific kind of evidence across many seasons. Evidence that Marge Simpson knows more about Homer's secrets than the show has ever asked her to address directly. Over the course of 36 years, Homer has had encounters, misadventures, and extended periods away from home that the show depicts from Homer's perspective and then resets before Marge is required to fully reckon with what happened. The infidelity question from the Mindy episode. The various alcohol-related blackouts the show references without fully dramatizing. The jobs Homer has held briefly that placed him in close proximity to situations the show glides past. The friends and acquaintances Homer has made and then never mentioned again. In ways that suggest the relationships existed outside the show's camera, range for reasons the show chose not to examine. Marge has been present for all of this. Not in the scenes the show didn't show, but in the aftermath of the scenes the show did show. She has watched Homer return from situations she wasn't fully informed about. She has processed explanations she may or may not have believed. She has made the specific, private calculations that partners in long marriages make when they encounter information that doesn't fully add up and have to decide what to do with the surplus. The mystery is not whether Homer has kept things from Marge. The show has established that he has, across dozens of episodes. The mystery is what Marge has kept from the show, what she has privately concluded about the gaps in Homer's accounts, what she has chosen to know and what she has chosen to not know in the deliberate, operational sense of a person who has made a decision about what their life can sustain. There is a specific quality of knowing that long marriages develop, a fluency with a partner's patterns that allows you to read the spaces between what they say as clearly as the words themselves. Marge has been married to Homer for the entire run of the show. She knows him. She knows the specific way his voice sounds when he is concealing something. She knows the difference between his genuine remorse and his strategic remorse. She knows with the precision of 36 years of intimate daily contact what a complete account from Homer sounds like versus an account with something left out. And the show has never asked her to use that knowledge directly. And it has never given Marge an episode where she looks at Homer with the full weight of what she knows and asks the questions she would ask if the show were willing to let her be as perceptive as she clearly is. Because Marge is not stupid. The show has established her emotional intelligence and her perceptiveness across hundreds of episodes. She reads people well. She understands Homer well. The comedy of their relationship depends on Homer being the reckless one and Marge being the one who has to manage the consequences. But the comedy also depends on Marge not pressing too hard on the questions that would make the relationship's foundation visible. The mystery is what Marge has decided not to ask. What she knows and has filed away in the specific internal archive that people in long marriages maintain. That's the repository of things that would be unsustainable to address directly and have been placed on a shelf somewhere behind the daily logistics of keeping a family together. The show has given you glimpses of this. The episodes where Marge processes Homer's behavior with a specific expression that the comedy framing doesn't fully account for. The moments where her patience has a quality that looks less like contentment and more like endurance. The line she said in the gambling episode about feeling free for the first time, which, when you place it next to 36 years of being the person who manages the aftermath of Homer's choices, sounds less like a confession about gambling and more like a confession about everything. What does Marge know? The show won't say. The show has never said. The show has needed Marge to be the stable one, the reset point, the thing that Homer comes back to and that the episode comes back to and that the audience comes back to. And stability in that function requires not fully dramatizing what it costs her. So the question sits there. In the record, in every scene where Marge forgives Homer for something without the show ever establishing what she actually knows about the thing she's forgiving. She knows more than the show has shown you. The evidence is in the way she knows it. The quiet, practiced fluency of a woman who has been paying attention for 36 years. What she has concluded from that attention is the mystery the show has never been willing to resolve. But let's go one level further, because the mystery of what Marge knows connects to something the show has been circling for its entire run without ever landing on. The show has, across 36 seasons, periodically brought Homer and Marge to the edge of something irreversible. Not the comedic crises that resolve neatly before the credits, the real ones. The episodes where the marriage genuinely appears to be at a breaking point, where the weight of the accumulated history between them becomes briefly visible in a way the comedy format cannot fully contain. In those episodes, the show consistently pulls back. The reconciliation arrives. The love reasserts itself. The marriage survives. And the thing the show never dramatizes fully is the conversation that would have to happen for that reconciliation to be genuine. On the one where Marge says what she actually knows, and Homer accounts for it, and something between them that has been accumulating for years is finally put on the table and dealt with. That conversation has never happened on screen. Not in any episode the show has produced. The reconciliations come without it. The marriage renews without full accounting. And the specific weight that the show has been building across 36 years of Homer's choices and Marge's management of their consequences keeps accumulating, unaddressed, in the private archive Marge maintains behind her kitchen counter. What would happen if that conversation happened? If Marge, with everything she knows, said it all out loud to Homer at once without the usual management and compression, without the practiced affect regulation that keeps her feelings within the bounds the household can absorb? The show cannot answer that question. The answer would require either the dissolution of the marriage, which the show's central premise cannot survive, or a reconciliation so thorough and so honest that the couple who emerged from it would not be the Homer and Marge the audience has been watching for 36 years. So the conversation stays in Marge's archive. The weight stays unaddressed. And the mystery of what she knows and what she has been carrying and what it has cost her to carry it remains the most intimate and most deliberately unresolved question the show has spent 3 decades building without ever being willing to answer. She knows more than the show has shown you. And the show has never been willing to show you what she knows. Because showing you would mean showing you what 36 years of being Marge Simpson actually looks like from the inside. And that, whatever else the show has been willing to say about its characters and their world, is the one truth it has protected most carefully. Mystery 9. The fate of Springfield's various catastrophes. Springfield has been destroyed, multiple times. Not damaged or disrupted or temporarily inconvenienced, but actually categorically destroyed in ways that should have permanently altered the town's physical and social reality. The tire fire has been burning since at least season 2, right when the show establishes it as a long-standing community fixture. There is a tire fire in Springfield and it has been burning for decades. The environmental and public health implications of a tire fire burning continuously for 30-plus years in the immediate vicinity of a residential community are not trivial, and the show acknowledges this occasionally in the form of jokes about the smell and the perpetual smoke. But the tire fire is never addressed, never extinguished, never investigated by any agency that might have jurisdiction over a decades-long uncontrolled combustion event. It just burns, year after year, in the background of shots, behind conversations about other things, what a permanent feature of Springfield's landscape that the show introduces as an established fact and then uses as visual atmosphere for the next 3 decades. The tire fire is the clearest example of a broader pattern in Springfield's relationship with its own catastrophes. The town experiences disasters at a frequency that should produce cumulative damage. Buildings are destroyed and rebuilt between episodes. The town itself is physically demolished in at least one major event and restored to its previous state with a speed that the show acknowledges briefly and then stops acknowledging entirely. The Simpsons movie provides the most dramatic version of this pattern. Springfield is sealed under a dome by the EPA due to contamination so severe the federal government classifies the entire town as a hazard. Yet the dome comes down at the end of the film. Springfield is rebuilt. The next episode proceeds as if the dome never happened. No resident references the dome in subsequent episodes. No ongoing political or legal consequence flows from the federal government's intervention. No investigation follows from the EPA's finding that Springfield was contaminated severely enough to require physical containment. The dome is not a continuity-altering event in the show's canon. It is a film plot that occurred and was then filed away with the tire fire and the skeletons and all the other things Springfield has encountered and declined to carry forward. The mystery isn't why the show does this. The episodic format requires it. Each episode is its own unit, and the cumulative weight of every prior disaster would make storytelling impossible if all of it were carried forward into every subsequent narrative. The show resets because all shows reset. That's the craft explanation. The mystery is what the resets mean within the logic of the show's own world. Because the show has established, through the principle and the pauper, through the radiation theory, through the coma theory, through every account of Springfield's collective amnesia, that the forgetting isn't just a production convention. It's a feature of Springfield itself. The town forgets because the town chooses to forget. Because the alternative, carrying the accumulated weight of everything that has happened, would make the version of Springfield that the population needs to believe in unsustainable. Every catastrophe that resets between episodes is a test of Springfield's collective amnesia. And Springfield passes every test, every time. The dome comes down. The buildings rebuild. The town returns to the baseline. Nobody mentions it. Because mentioning it would mean confronting what it means that it happened. And confronting what it means would require confronting the plant and burns and the contamination and the specific documented history of a community that has been living inside a slow-motion industrial disaster for 36 years without ever finding a way to collectively name what is happening to them. The tire fire is still burning. The dome was real. The catastrophes accumulate in the record even as they disappear from the characters' memories. The mystery is whether the forgetting is mercy or whether it's the mechanism. Whether Springfield's collective amnesia is the town coping with the weight of what it has experienced, or whether it's the thing that allows the weight to keep accumulating, episode after episode, reset after reset, because nothing is ever fully reckoned with, and therefore nothing is ever actually resolved. Let's sit with the tire fire specifically, because it's the most sustained example of Springfield's relationship with its own catastrophes. The tire fire has been burning since the early seasons of the show. That places it at somewhere between 20 and 30 years of continuous operation as of the show's current timeline, which, given Springfield's floating chronology, could be read as significantly longer. A tire fire burning for 30 years has specific, documented consequences in the real world. Burning tires release sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, benzene, and a range of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are carcinogenic compounds that accumulate in soil and water and living tissue. A fire burning at sufficient scale for sufficient duration creates a persistent contamination event that affects everything within its atmospheric reach for years after the fire itself is extinguished. Springfield's tire fire has never been extinguished. It is burning right now in the show's permanent present. Every person who lives in Springfield has been breathing the output of that fire for the entirety of their residence there. Every child born in Springfield has breathed it from birth. The fire is in the background of outdoor shots. Now it is visible from various locations around town. It is a feature of the landscape so thoroughly established that the show stopped calling attention to it decades ago, and nobody is doing anything about it. That sentence, applied to an industrial contamination event of this duration and severity, is not a comedy beat. It's an indictment. It's the show saying, in the visual language of background detail rather than explicit narrative, that Springfield is a town where a 30-year environmental disaster has been normalized to the point of invisibility. Add that to the nuclear plant, add it to the dome, add it to every catastrophe the show has documented, and then reset. And what you have is a picture of a town that has been experiencing sustained, multi-source environmental and structural assault for its entire existence, and has developed, collectively and individually, the specific psychological adaptation of not seeing it anymore. Springfield doesn't have a disaster response protocol. It has a disaster forgetting protocol. And the forgetting protocol has been operating continuously and efficiently for 36 years. The tire fire is still burning. It has been burning for 36 years. The smoke is still in the air over Springfield. The residents have simply stopped seeing it. Which might be the most disturbing thing the show has ever shown you. Not by naming it, not by making it a plot, just by putting it in the background of shot after shot after shot for 3.5 decades and letting the audience develop alongside Springfield's residents. Now, the same practiced incuriosity that allows a 30-year tire fire to become wallpaper. Mystery 10. What Burns actually did in World War II. Burns served in World War II. This is established canon. The show has depicted his wartime service across various episodes and flashback sequences, and what it depicts is not the heroic participation of a man who answered his country's call, but something considerably more ambiguous and at times actively sinister. Burns stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war. This is stated explicitly in the show. Not implied, not suggested, not a fan theory assembled from scattered evidence. The show tells you that Charles Montgomery Burns, during World War II, physically stole a piece of currency worth $1 trillion from the U.S. government and concealed it for decades. The show plays this mostly for comedy. The $1 trillion bill is a MacGuffin in the episode that features it. Burns is comically villainous about his wartime theft in the way he is comically villainous about most things. The scale of it, the $1 trillion, the wartime context, the literal theft from the federal government during a national crisis, is part of the joke's architecture. The number is so large it loses its weight. You laugh and move on. But the weight is there if you don't move on. $1 trillion stolen from the United States government during World War II is not a comedy beat in any context outside Springfield. It is, as in any real-world application, an act of treason. The specific conditions of wartime, the specific legal and moral weight that the American government places on crimes committed against it during a declared war, make Burns's theft something that should have consequences that followed him for the rest of his life, however long that life has been. There were no consequences. Burns kept the money. Burns built his empire. Burns operates today from a position of absolute financial security and institutional power, with no visible legacy of accountability for what he did during the war. And the wartime theft is only the most explicit documented example of a broader pattern the show establishes around Burns's World War II service. The show hints, in various episodes and throwaway lines, that Burns's relationship with the Allied war effort was not straightforward, that he was connected to interests and operations on multiple sides of the conflict in ways that the show gestures toward without fully mapping. That the moral simplicity of the war narrative, America good, Allies good, Axis evil, does not apply cleanly to Burns's specific position during those years. Burns is old enough to have been fully formed before the war. He entered the conflict with an existing set of values and loyalties and financial interests, and those values and loyalties and interests did not necessarily align cleanly with the nation he was technically serving. The show has depicted Burns as someone whose primary loyalty has always been to the continuation and expansion of his own wealth and power. And that loyalty predates the war and survived it intact. What did Burns actually do between 1941 and 1945? The show has given you pieces. The $1 trillion bill. The hints of morally compromised operations. The age and the frailty and the institutional survival of a man who emerged from the deadliest conflict in human history, with his fortune and his power intact, and his record apparently clean enough to never face accountability for any of it. The complete picture is one the show has never assembled. The pieces are in the record, the theft is confirmed, the hints of broader wartime complexity are present. But the full accounting, the complete story of what Burns did and who he did it with, and what it cost the people around him during those years, is a mystery the show introduced and then left scattered across 3.5 decades of episodes without ever putting it together. Maybe because putting it together would produce something too dark for even Springfield to contain. Maybe because some accounts, once fully assembled, require consequences. And in Springfield, the man with enough money never faces consequences. Burns survived the war. He survived everything. The mystery is not whether he did terrible things. The show has confirmed that he did. The mystery is the full scope of them, and the full scope has never been revealed. Mystery 11. The question of what happens when Burns dies. Burns has come closer to death than almost any other character in the show's history. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized. He has collapsed, been abandoned in the wilderness, been poisoned, been attacked. He has had every disease known to medical science simultaneously, held in a state of perpetual gridlock, where each illness prevents the others from killing him. He requires weekly radiation treatments to stay alive. Without them, he dies within days. The margin for error is 0, and yet he survives, consistently. Season after season, year after year, the man who should not be able to survive survives. But the biological impossibility continues to be biologically impossible. But the show has also established, through the mechanism of Burns's survival, something it has never directly addressed. What happens when it stops working? Burns's existence depends on a maintenance schedule. It is not a metaphor. It is a literal weekly medical intervention without which his body's disease equilibrium collapses. That intervention is managed by Smithers, who is the only person who fully understands the protocol and has the access and the competence to administer it correctly. Smithers is not immortal. Smithers is also aging. The relationship between Burns and Smithers is the central dependency relationship in Burns's survival architecture. And it is a relationship with exactly one point of failure, Smithers himself. What happens when Smithers can no longer do it? What happens when Smithers is gone? Not through choice, not through being fired or resigning, but through the natural biological process that affects everyone who is not receiving weekly radiation treatments to maintain an impossibly fragile disease equilibrium? Burns has not answered this question. The show has not answered this question. The implication of Burns's survival mechanism is that it has been running continuously for decades because Smithers has been continuously present to manage it. And the question of what happens when that continuity breaks is one the show has placed in the subtext without ever allowing it to surface. The scarier version of the question is this. Burns knows. Burns has thought about this. Burns has been managing his own survival with the calculated precision of someone who has had a century of practice at it, and the single point of failure that Smithers represents is not something Burns would have overlooked. He would have considered it. He would have developed contingencies. What are the contingencies? The show suggests, in the way that it consistently suggests things it will not say directly, that Burns's institutional structures, the wealth and the infrastructure and the political influence and the medical apparatus he has built across decades are partially designed to address exactly this problem, to ensure that the mechanism of his survival can continue even if the specific person currently managing it cannot. But the details of that contingency are never shown. Burns's succession planning, if it exists entirely off-screen. We don't see it. We don't know who else might be aware of the treatment protocol. We don't know whether Smithers has trained anyone. We don't know whether Burns has compensated for the mortality of the only person who keeps him alive. And the biggest question, the one that sits underneath all the others, is what happens to Springfield when Burns finally dies. The town's economy runs on the plant. The plant runs on Burns. Burns's institutional knowledge, his financial controls, his political relationships, his decades of managed corruption are not documented anywhere that Springfield's residents would have access to after his death. The web of dependencies and debts and arrangements that Burns has built across his career exists only in Burns's mind and in whatever records Smithers has maintained. When Burns dies, Springfield loses its economic center. The plant still operates, presumably. The power keeps coming. But the specific arrangement of power and corruption and managed dependence that Burns has maintained for decades, the arrangement that keeps Springfield exactly as it is, cannot survive its architect. What happens to Springfield after Burns? The show has never explored this. It has never needed to because Burns is functionally immortal within the show's running timeline. But the question exists in the logic of the world the show has built. And the answer, the actual answer about what happens to a town whose entire social and economic structure is organized around a single extraordinarily old man's continued existence, is one of the most genuinely unsettling things the show's implications contain. But Burns built a town around himself, a living monument to his own continued survival. And when the survival finally fails, the monument has no plan for what comes next. The town will have to find one. The show never got there, but the question of what Springfield becomes on the other side of Burns is sitting in the record, waiting. Like everything else Springfield has decided not to address until it can't avoid it. There is one more dimension to this mystery that the show has been building toward without ever acknowledging it directly. Consider what Burns's death would mean, not just economically, but psychologically for the people of Springfield. Burns has been the defining organizing force of Springfield for the entirety of the show's run. He is, in the most functional sense, that's the reason the town exists in the specific configuration it currently exists in. The power plant is his, the electricity is his, the contamination is his. The cognitive fog that keeps the population from examining its own circumstances too closely is, under the radiation theory, his. The economic dependency that keeps every resident tethered to their specific position in Springfield's social order is his. Burns is the thing that Springfield orbits. Even the residents who have never met him, who would not recognize him on the street, who have no direct connection to the plant or its operations, are living lives shaped by his decisions. Where they work, what they earn, what they breathe, what they can afford to know about what they breathe. All of it traces back to Burns. When Burns dies, the organizing center of Springfield's world disappears. And what happens to a system that has been organized around a single point for longer than most of its components can remember is not predictable from within the system. The people of Springfield have no frame of reference for what their town looks like without him. They have no memory of a time before his ownership was the central fact of their existence. The dependency is total. The contingency planning, as we have established, is invisible. And the mystery of what Springfield becomes after Burns is not just an economic question or a political question. It is a question about identity, about what a community is when the thing that defined it for a century is suddenly gone. Springfield would have to figure out who it is without Burns telling it. That's the most unsettling version of the question. Not what happens to the plant, not what happens to the economy. What happens to the people when the thing that made them what they are is no longer there to make them anything? The show never answered this. It kept Burns alive. It will probably keep him alive forever, the way it keeps everyone alive forever, through the protective fiction of the floating timeline and the reset button and the specific mercy of a narrative that refuses to end. But the question is there, in the record, underneath every episode where Burns is comically villainous and functionally immortal. What happens to Springfield when the thing it was built around is finally gone? The show doesn't know. Springfield doesn't know, and neither, if we're honest, do we. But Mystery 12. The full truth about Mona Simpson and what she knew. Mona Simpson was Homer's mother. For the first 6 seasons of the show, she was officially dead. Abe Simpson had told Homer she died when he was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer grew up believing his mother had left him through death rather than choice, and the specific weight of that belief, the specific shape of the grief it produced, informed everything about who Homer became. In Season 7, Mother Simpson revealed the truth. Mona hadn't died. She had been radicalized in 1969, had joined a group of activists who targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Burns, had accidentally cured a security guard's asthma during the raid, and had been spotted by Burns as the group fled. Burns reported her to the FBI. She became a fugitive. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the underground for 27 years. The show handled her return with more genuine emotional weight than almost anything else in its run. The reunion between Homer and his mother is one of the most unguarded moments of real feeling the show has ever produced. The scene where they stand at a grave that turns out to belong to Walt Whitman rather than Mona is simultaneously absurd and moving in the specific way The Simpsons at its best can be. But the mystery that Mona's return generates is one the show surfaces and then leaves unresolved, because the question isn't just what happened to Mona. The question is what Mona knew and when she knew it. Mona spent 27 years as a fugitive. 27 years of proximity to movements and information and people who were paying attention to things the mainstream world wasn't examining. 27 years of having good reason to understand how power worked, how institutions operated, what the specific mechanisms of the exploitation she had fought against actually looked like from the inside. During those 27 years, Homer grew up. Homer got married. Homer had children. Homer went to work at the plant that Mona's group had targeted. The man Homer became, the specific damaged version of Homer that the show has documented across 36 seasons, is at least partially the product of growing up without his mother. Burns knew this, but the show establishes that Burns recognized Mona almost immediately when she returned to Springfield. He had maintained whatever surveillance or awareness was necessary to identify her after decades. The grudge Burns held against a woman who destroyed his weapons laboratory was active and sustained across the same 27 years that Homer was growing up motherless. What did Mona know about Homer's situation during those years? Did she know he was working for Burns? Did she know that the man whose laboratory she had helped to destroy was the same man now signing her son's paychecks? Did she understand from her position outside Springfield and outside the specific cognitive fog that the contamination produces in long-term residents, the full picture of what Burns had done to Homer's family? The show suggests she did. Yet the scene where Mona comes back and discovers that Homer works for Burns has a quality of horror that the comedy framing softens, but doesn't eliminate. She came back to find her son living inside the empire of the man who drove her away. But the full account of what Mona knew and when, the complete picture of her 27 years as a fugitive, and what she understood about Springfield and Burns and her family from the outside is something the show never fully explored. The episodes featuring Mona are about reunion and loss, and the specific emotional geometry of a parent and child separated for most of their lives. They are not investigative, they are not about what Mona learned. What did she learn? What did she piece together from 27 years of outsider perspective about the town and the man and the arrangements that produced the Homer she came back to find? The show gave you her death scene. Homer holding her hand as she slipped away, the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. No cutaway gag, no reset, just a man and his mother and the specific, irreducible sadness of time that cannot be recovered. It didn't give you her full account. What she knew. What she had been carrying. What she understood about Springfield and Burns and her family that she took with her when she died. That account exists somewhere in the show's logic. In the 27 years between 1969 and 1996. In the specific education that decades of fugitive existence produces. Mona Simpson knew more about what Burns had done to Springfield and to her son than the show was willing to dramatize. The grief of her death scene is partly the grief of all the things she might have said, but didn't. The mystery is what those things were. But sit with the structure of what Mona knew for a moment longer, because it is more disturbing than it first appears. Mona left Springfield in 1969. She spent 27 years as a fugitive, living outside the specific bubble of managed ignorance that Springfield's contaminated environment produces in long-term residents. She had distance. She had perspective. She had the specific clarity that comes from being outside a system and watching it from the outside rather than living inside it where the fog is permanent and the baseline keeps shifting. From that outside position, she could see what Burns had done, not just to his weapons laboratory or to the town's environment, to her family. She could see the arc of what happened to Homer without her. She could see with the clarity of someone who was not breathing Springfield's air or drinking Springfield's water, the specific shape of the damage that growing up without a mother in a contaminated town in the house of a distant father had done to her son. She came back. She reconnected. And then Burns spotted her and reported her, and she had to leave again. The second departure is the one the show handles with the most emotional weight. The first time Mona left, Homer was asleep. He didn't know it was happening. He woke up and she was gone and was told she had died. The second time, he was awake. He knew. He watched her go. But he had had enough time to remember what it felt like to have a mother and to feel what it cost to lose that again. And Mona, leaving for the second time, carried with her everything she had understood during the reunion. Everything she had seen in her son that confirmed what she had feared from 27 years of distance. Everything she knew about what Burns had done and was still doing and would keep doing as long as the plant ran, and the town's cognitive infrastructure kept the population from understanding what was happening to them. She died eventually. Homer held her hand. The show gave that scene all the weight it deserved. What it didn't give the scene was the conversation that should have preceded it. The one where Mona told Homer, clearly and directly, everything she had understood from the outside. About Burns, about the plant, about what Homer's life meant in the context of a deliberate and sustained campaign of environmental destruction that had been running since before he was born. The show couldn't have that conversation. It would have required Homer to understand things the show needs him not to understand. It would have required Mona to say things that would make the comedy of Homer's daily situation unsustainable going forward. So the conversation didn't happen. Mona died with what she knew. Homer held her hand and grieved a mother he had barely gotten to have. And everything Mona understood, everything her 27 years of outsider clarity had shown her, went with her. The mystery is not just what Mona knew. It's what Homer might have become if she had told him. If the 27 years of perspective she carried had been transferred, even partially, to the son who needed it most. That Homer, the one who received his mother's full account, doesn't exist. The show made sure of that. But the ghost of him is in that death scene. In the space between what Mona said and what she didn't say. In the hand Homer held and the words that should have been spoken and the years that cannot be recovered. That ghost is one of the most haunting things in the show's entire record. And the show never officially acknowledged it was there. Mystery. 13. The question of Springfield's children and what they inherit. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. And he has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa is 8. She has been 8 since 1989. Maggie has been 1 year old since 1989. The floating timeline that keeps these children at the same age forever is the show's most fundamental structural choice, and it has been discussed and debated and analyzed from every possible angle for 36 years. But the mystery this section examines is not the familiar one about why nobody ages. It's the one that sits underneath that mystery, the one that the floating timeline's existence implies, but without the show ever addressing it. What do these children inherit? Not in the legal or financial sense, in the environmental and cognitive sense. These are children who have been born and raised in Springfield, but who have been drinking the water and breathing the air and living in the specific atmospheric envelope of a town contaminated by an inadequately maintained nuclear facility for the entirety of their lives. They are the second generation of Simpsons in Springfield, following parents who were themselves born and raised in the same contaminated environment. The show has documented the physical characteristics these children share with every other Springfield resident. The 4 fingers, the yellow skin, the specific proportional deviations from normal human anatomy that the show distinguishes from guest characters who visit Springfield and look different. These are not artistic choices in any straightforward sense. Within the show's own visual logic, Springfield residents look different from people who don't live in Springfield. The difference is visible and consistent, and the show has never provided an explanation for it that doesn't implicate the plant. Bart's behavioral profile, impulsive, short-tempered, resistant to authority, unable to sustain focus, quick to anger, has been documented across 36 seasons. The show presents this as character, as Bart being Bart, as the naturally rebellious spirit of a boy who doesn't fit the institutional expectations placed on him. But Bart's behavioral profile also fits, with uncomfortable precision, the documented cognitive effects of chronic low-level radiation exposure in developing children. The attention difficulties, the impulse control issues, the emotional dysregulation. These are not character traits that exist in isolation. They are, not in the context of Springfield's established environmental contamination, symptoms The show never connects these dots explicitly. It doesn't show you a doctor looking at Bart's test results and noting the correlation between his behavioral profile and his exposure environment. It doesn't give you a scene where a specialist examines Bart and names what they see. The connection exists in the evidence. It does not exist in the show's explicit text. Lisa's profile is the inverse of Bart's, as we have discussed, and the inversion is equally disturbing. If Bart's symptoms suggest cognitive damage, Lisa's extraordinary intelligence suggests cognitive amplification. Same environment, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. Different outcomes in different children. Which is consistent with what radiation exposure research suggests about the variability of effects across individuals. And Maggie. Maggie has been observed performing cognitive tasks that no one-year-old should be capable of. Problem solving at levels that exceed her physical development. Strategic thinking. Sustained observation. The specific kind of intelligence that operates below the radar because everyone around her has dismissed the possibility of its presence. These three children are growing up in a contaminated town with contaminated parents, and they are displaying, collectively, a profile of cognitive effects that is consistent with the environmental conditions they have been raised in. And the show has never acknowledged this. The effects are there in the record. The cause is there in the record. That the connection between them exists in the evidence. The mystery is what happens to these children when they grow up, except the show never lets them grow up. The floating timeline is the mechanism by which this question is avoided. Bart cannot accumulate the damage of aging in Springfield because Bart stays 10 years old. Lisa cannot confront the full implications of her specific cognitive situation because she stays 8. The children are frozen at the ages at which the question of what they inherit from Springfield is just beginning to become relevant. The show built a world with serious and specific implications for what childhood in that world produces. And then it froze the children at the point just before those implications have to be fully reckoned with. That is either mercy or avoidance, depending on which version of the show's relationship with its own implications you believe in. The children stay young, the question stays open, and Springfield keeps generating another generation of residents who will carry in their bodies whatever the plant has done to the environment they were born into. The mystery of what they inherit has no answer. It has only the accumulated evidence of what the show has shown you, and the conclusions that evidence demands if you follow it, without the protection of the floating timeline's perpetual deferral. But there is one more angle on this mystery that the show opens and leaves open, and it's the one that connects the children's situation to the show's own relationship with its audience most directly. The show has imagined its characters aging, not just in throwaway references, but in full episodes built around the premise of Springfield's children as adults. Lisa's Wedding in Season 6 takes the audience to a future where Lisa is a young woman, engaged, building a life outside Springfield, and the portrait is extraordinary in its specificity. Future Lisa is exactly who present Lisa is pointed toward. She is brilliant, principled, lonely, searching for connection in a world that has never quite learned how to receive her. She has not resolved her Springfield. She has carried it with her. The show built that future with care. It showed you who these children could become. It demonstrated its own capacity to imagine them past the age of frozen childhood. And then it closed the window. Lisa returned to 8 years old. The future was filed away. The floating timeline resumed. That choice, made deliberately, tells you something specific about what the show believes. It believes, or behaves as though it believes, that the future is too costly to fully commit to. That showing you who Bart might become, who Maggie might become, what the specific inheritance of growing up in Springfield produces in the adults these children would eventually be, is something the show cannot sustain and keep being itself. Because the adults these children would become are not comedy characters. They are the outcomes of everything the show has documented about what childhood in Springfield produces. They carry the contamination and the cognitive effects and the emotional damage and the specific wounds of being raised in a household and a town that was not designed with their flourishing in mind. The show glimpsed that future in one Season 6 episode and then retreated from it and has never fully returned. And the mystery of what Springfield's children inherit is the mystery of what that retreat is protecting. Whether it's protecting the audience from something too heavy for a Sunday night comedy, whether it's protecting the characters from the full weight of what their circumstances actually mean, whether it's protecting the show from having to acknowledge what 36 years of building a specific environment around specific children has actually been building toward. The children stay young. The question stays open. And every year, the answer they are being protected from gets a year older while they stay exactly the same age. That gap between the age the children are and the age the answer is, it is the most precise measurement of what Springfield's floating timeline actually costs. Mystery 14. The Unseen Episodes and What Happened in the Gaps. The Simpsons has 788 episodes. That sounds like a complete record. It sounds like a thorough accounting of Springfield and its residents across 36 years. It isn't. Each episode is approximately 22 minutes long. 22 minutes selected from the total time of a life being lived in Springfield. The gaps between episodes, the hours and days and weeks not shown, are vastly larger than the episodes themselves. The show has shown you, in its entire run, not less than 300 hours of Springfield. The characters have been alive in the show's logic for 36 years. The math leaves most of their lives in the dark. What happens in the gaps? This sounds like a frivolous question until you apply it to specific characters and specific moments in the show's established history. The gap after the Mindy episode, what happened in that hotel room and in the days immediately following Homer's return home. The gap after each of Moe's failed relationships, what that specifically looks like in the hours after the episode ends and before the reset arrives. The gap between Ned's psychiatric hospitalization and his return to Springfield as the same Ned he apparently always was. What the actual recovery looked like, whether it was a recovery at all in any clinical sense. While the gaps are where the show's characters are most themselves. Not the performing selves that the episodes document, the versions of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Ned and Burns that are visible because the camera is on them. The private selves. The selves that exist between the plots. Burns's private self exists almost entirely in the gaps. The show gives you Burns at his most theatrical, his most deliberately villainous, his most operatically cruel. It doesn't give you Burns in the small hours. Burns sitting with the specific loneliness that the show has implied across dozens of episodes without dramatizing. Burns with Smithers in the spaces where nothing particular is happening, and the performance of power can relax slightly. What does Burns look like when no one is watching? The show has gestured toward this question in individual episodes. There are moments where the comedy frame drops slightly and something else looks through. Burns visiting his old college friends who have all died. Burns in the moments where his memory of the deep past surfaces and the distance between then and now becomes visible. Burns with the specific quality of solitude that someone who has lived as long as he has and outlasted everyone he has ever known would carry with them. The show can't inhabit those. The format doesn't allow it. Each episode is its own unit with its own story and its own logic and its own beginning and end. The gaps between them are structurally invisible, but the gaps are where the real lives of these characters exist, the lives between the plots. The experiences that accumulate across 36 years of living in Springfield and never make it into 22-minute episodes because they don't have stories attached to them. Just living. Just the ordinary and extraordinary substance of days that the show doesn't show you. Marge in the kitchen at midnight when everyone else is asleep. Not in an episode where the midnight is narratively significant. Just midnight. Just Marge alone with whatever thoughts the show has never been invited into. Homer on the drive home from work. Not on a drive that becomes a plot, just the drive. 20 minutes of ordinary travel between the plant and Evergreen Terrace, 36 years of it, and the show has shown you perhaps a dozen of those drives. Lisa practicing her saxophone in the room at the end of the hall, while not a scene where the saxophone playing matters to the episode's story. Just the practicing, just Lisa alone with the music, night after night, finding whatever it is she finds there. These gaps are the mystery the show can't address by design. They are the unshowable substance of lives that exist beyond their narrative functions. Springfield is a real place in the specific sense that it has residents whose lives are larger than their stories, and the stories are all we have access to. And the lives go on in the spaces between them in ways that we can only infer from the edges of what we do see. The unseen episodes are the real Springfield, the one the show built around and never showed you. The mystery is what it looks like. But we can make some inferences, because the show, even in the episodes it did produce, gives you edges of the unseen ones. It gives you glimpses of the gaps. A character in one episode mentions something that happened between episodes, something that the show doesn't dramatize but acknowledges as having occurred in the space between one week's story and the next. A relationship has shifted slightly in ways the narrative hasn't accounted for. A reference is made to an event that exists in the record as a fact, but not as a scene. These glimpses are the show's acknowledgement that Springfield exists between episodes, that the lives of these characters do not pause when the credits roll and resume when the next cold open begins. Something happens between. Life continues. The gaps are real. And what the gaps contain, if you assemble the glimpses, is a version of Springfield that is quieter and more human and more genuinely difficult than the version the show commits to screen. The version where Mo sits alone in his bar after closing time with no comedy audience and no laugh track. The version where Ned prays in a dark house in the hours before dawn and whatever answers his faith does or doesn't provide are not witnessed by anyone. The version where Burns, without Smithers and without the performance of villainy that his public presence requires, is simply a very old man in a very large house with most of the century behind him, and whatever is in front of him stretching out in the dark. The version where Homer drives home from work, not during an episode, not as part of a story, just the ordinary commute, and then sits in the car for a few minutes after he pulls into the driveway on Evergreen Terrace. Not doing anything, just sitting, looking at the house, at the windows where the lights are on, knowing that inside are the people his life is organized around, the people he would do anything for and has done things for, that the show has documented across 36 years, and that he carries with him in whatever way his specific brain carries things. And then he gets out of the car and goes inside. That scene has never been in an episode. It doesn't need to be. It exists in the accumulated weight of 36 years of Homer Simpson being Homer Simpson, and it is more moving than most of what the show has chosen to show you. And it is as real as anything else in Springfield, and the show has never officially acknowledged that it happens. But the mystery of the unseen episodes is finally, the mystery of why the show generates such powerful attachment in its audience. The episodes you watch are the surface. The unseen episodes, the ones that exist in the gaps and the glimpses and the accumulated implication of everything the show has built across 36 years, are the depth. The show earned its attachment by building a world real enough to have a depth the camera never enters. Real enough to have lives the audience knows exist even when the show isn't showing them. Springfield is real in the specific way that imagined places become real when enough people have lived in them long enough. Not in any verifiable geographic sense, in the sense that matters more. In the sense that a place becomes real when people know what it looks like between the stories. That when they can imagine it in the dark, in the hours between episodes, with the lights on in the familiar houses and the tire fire burning in the background, and the characters going about lives that the show has never fully shown, and that the audience has always somehow known. The unseen episodes are the real Springfield. They always have been. Mystery 15. Why can't we let them go? The final unsolved mystery. This is the mystery that contains all the others. The one that sits at the center of everything we've been examining tonight and refuses to resolve into a clean answer no matter how long you spend with it. Why can't we let them go? The Simpsons has been on television for 36 years. Most of its current audience has never known a world without it. It was there before they were old enough to watch it, and it was there when they were old enough, and it has been there every year since, and it will be there next season and the season after that. The show has outlasted the careers of most of the people who made it. It has outlasted several of the people who made it in the most permanent sense. It has outlasted decades of predictions about its imminent decline, about the moment when it would finally exhaust its audience's patience or its own storytelling capacity and stop. It hasn't stopped. The obvious answers to why it hasn't stopped are the economic ones. The show is valuable. The franchise generates revenue. The network wants the episodes, and the studio wants the merchandise and the streaming deals. Want the catalog, and the arithmetic of that commercial reality explains the show's continued production more reliably than anything having to do with creative vitality. But the economic answer doesn't explain the audience. The show hasn't just been produced for 36 years. It has been watched for 36 years. By tens of millions of people who return to it not because the commercial infrastructure requires them to, but because they want to. Because Springfield exerts a pull on them that doesn't diminish with familiarity the way most things do. Because knowing every joke and every character and every recurring location doesn't make the show less interesting to them. It makes it more. Why? Well, the sentimental answer is that the show represents something. The family on the couch, the yellow faces, the familiar dynamics of a household that argues and reconciles and falls apart and holds together, represents the version of American family life that the audience has needed to believe exists. Homer and Marge together, Bart and Lisa arguing, Maggie watching from the corner. It is a portrait of domestic life in its most essential, recognizable form, stripped of specific wealth or class or regional identity, made universal by being made impossible. Nobody lives in Springfield. Everybody recognizes it. That's the sentimental answer, and it's true as far as it goes. But the sentimental answer doesn't account for the theories, for the decades of intense fan analysis that has produced interpretations of this show more elaborate and more internally consistent than the analysis applied to most literary works taught in universities. The coma theory, the radiation theory, the locked room mystery of who shot Burns, the geographic impossibility of Springfield's location, the unsolved mysteries we've spent this entire video examining. If the show were simply a comfortable family comedy that offered sentimental familiarity, it would not have generated this volume of interpretive obsession. Something else is happening. The show is dense. Not in the way an academic text is dense, not in a way that requires specialized knowledge to access. Dense in the way that real things are dense. In the way that places you have actually lived are dense, layered with history and implication and the specific gravity of things that happen there that you can still feel even after you've left. Springfield has that density. It has been generating it for 36 years, accumulating detail upon detail, contradiction upon contradiction, mystery upon mystery, until the town has achieved a kind of weight that fictional places rarely achieve. And weight creates pull. Weight is what you feel when you return to something that has mattered to you for a long time and find that it still matters, still has things to show you, still generates questions you haven't fully answered. The unsolved mysteries we've examined tonight are not failures of the show's storytelling. They are evidence of the show's ambition. A show that planted the skeletons in the basement, and the crayon in Homer's brain, and the ambiguous hotel room, and the geographic impossibility, and the real Skinner on the train, and all the rest of it, was a show that was building something larger than any individual episode could contain. Building a world, an actual world, with the specific density and the specific unresolved weight that real worlds carry. We can't let them go because we recognize that weight. We have lived in places with basements we weren't supposed to examine. We have been in households where certain questions weren't asked. We have been part of communities that chose comfortable fictions over inconvenient truths and made the choosing look like wisdom or kindness, or just the way things work. Springfield is those places, all of them. A compressed and yellowed and given 4 fingers in a nuclear power plant, and a laugh track to make the weight bearable. We can't let them go because they are us. Not the version of us we present in daylight. The version that watches from the corner of the room with the specific, patient attention of someone who understands that the most important things are the things nobody is saying. The version that looks like Maggie. Silent, watching, already knowing more than anyone suspects. The mysteries will never all be solved. Springfield won't allow it. The show won't allow it. The specific function that unsolved mysteries serve in the audience's relationship with the show, keeping the curiosity alive, keeping the engagement active, giving the fans something to return to and turn over and approach from new angles, is too valuable to resolve. And the unsolved mysteries are, in a deeper sense, the most accurate thing about the show. Life doesn't resolve cleanly. Questions pile up. The answers that get provided generate new questions. The official explanation never quite accounts for all the evidence. The things that happen in the gaps stay in the gaps. The skeletons remain in the basement, and the train carries the real Skinner away from Springfield, and the hotel room door never fully opens or closes, and Marge knows more than she says, and Burns remembers more than he admits, and the tire fire burns on and on in the background of every shot, the permanent low-level emergency that everyone has agreed to stop treating as an emergency. Think about what we have been through tonight. 15 mysteries. 15 doors the show opened and declined to walk through. 15 questions that sit in the permanent record of 36 seasons of the most documented fictional town in American history. Unresolved, unacknowledged, and in every case more disturbing the longer you sit with them than they are at first glance. The skeletons in the basement tell you something about what Burns's operation has actually cost in human terms that the show's comedy framing was never designed to address directly. The geographic impossibility of Springfield tells you something about the specific conditions that allow a man like Burns to operate without accountability for as long as he has. The crayon in Homer's brain tells you something about who Homer could have been and what the system needed him not to become. But the real Skinner on the train tells you something about how Springfield maintains its fictions, not through passive forgetting, but through active institutional choices. Mona Simpson's death tells you something about the specific grief of knowledge that cannot be transferred, of understanding that goes to the grave with the person who carried it. Each mystery, examined individually, is a puzzle with missing pieces. Examined together, they are a portrait. The portrait of a town that has been living inside a very specific kind of catastrophe for 36 years and has developed across that time every possible defense against seeing it clearly. The audience has developed those same defenses alongside Springfield. And we have been watching long enough that the yellow skin and the four fingers and the three-eyed fish and the tire fire are background information. We have normalized Springfield the way Springfield has normalized itself. We see the episodes and we laugh at the jokes and we love the characters and we return next week. But some part of us, the part that generates the theories and the midnight rewatches and the Reddit threads that have been running for 20 years, knows something is off. Knows there are questions the show raised and didn't answer. Knows the darkness and the gaps between the jokes is real and specific and points somewhere the show was never quite willing to go. That part is right. The mysteries are real. The questions are genuine. The evidence is in the record. That's Springfield. That's the show. That's the specific, haunting, oddly comfortable density of a place we have been living in for 36 years without ever quite figuring out what it is. The mysteries are the mystery. The answer to why we can't let them go is this. Because letting them go means admitting that we've been sitting with all of this for 36 years and we still don't fully understand it. That the family on the couch and the town around them and the 36 seasons of evidence about who they are and what their world means contains more than we have managed to extract. That Springfield, that impossible, beautiful, contaminated, amnesiac, self-sustaining closed system of a town, is deeper than we have found the bottom of. And we can't let go of something we haven't reached the bottom of. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Springfield will be here when you come back. Not it always is. The tire fire will still be burning. The cooling towers will still be cracked. Homer will still be walking through the door at 5:30 after another shift at the plant. And Marge will still be in the kitchen, and Bart will still be 10 years old. And Lisa will still be playing her saxophone in the room at the end of the hall, and Maggie will still be in the corner, watching everything with those enormous eyes and knowing, as she has always known, more than anyone in that house has ever thought to ask her. That's Springfield. That's the show that has been keeping you company tonight. Thank you for spending this time in it with me. If you're still awake, drop a comment and tell me which mystery has been sitting with you longest. The one that won't leave you alone. The one you come back to. And if you're drifting off, that's exactly what this is for. I'll see you in the next one. Springfield will be right here. It always is.